If you want the ultimate, you've got to be willing to pay the ultimate price. Point Break wasn't just an adrenaline-fueled surf movie. It was a high-stakes gamble where actors risked their lives, directors fought studio executives, and Hollywood's elite rejected roles that would define careers. While audiences thrilled to bank robbers in presidential masks, behind the cameras lurked near-death experiences, broken bones, and a director fighting to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. The surfboards might look peaceful on screen, but off-camera, Keanu Reeves nearly drowned 4 separate times. Patrick Swayze defied studio insurance policies by insisting on jumping from an airplane himself. And one of Hollywood's biggest stars turned down the lead role because he thought the script was too ridiculous. Today, we're diving into 20 weird facts about Point Break that will change how you see this cult classic forever. And stick around for our bonus fact, the bizarre, real-world crime wave that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. So grab your wetsuit and presidential mask as we paddle into the unknown history of Point Break. 1. The movie almost starred Johnny Depp and Willem Dafoe, not Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. Johnny Depp was the studio's first choice to play FBI agent Johnny Utah, not because of his acting chops, but because executives thought his 21 Jump Street fame would draw teen audiences. Depp wasn't interested. He was desperately trying to escape his TV heartthrob image and pursuing quirky roles that would eventually lead to Edward Scissorhands. The role of spiritual surfer criminal Bodhi wasn't written for Patrick Swayze either. Director Catherine Bigelow wanted Willem Dafoe to bring his intensity to the part. It wasn't a matter of talent. It was a battle of visions. When Swayze, fresh off Ghost and Dirty Dancing, read the script, he launched a personal campaign, bombarding Bigelow with letters and calls. The clincher? Swayze was an experienced skydiver with over 50 jumps under his belt. In a role requiring extreme sports authenticity, his real-world adrenaline addiction convinced Bigelow he was the embodiment of Bodhi. 2. Keanu Reeves couldn't surf at all before filming. When Keanu signed on, he couldn't tell the difference between the nose and tail of a surfboard. The script required him to look like he'd been surfing for years. The solution wasn't movie magic or stunt doubles. It was brutal, relentless training. Keanu spent 3 months training with professional surfer Dennis Jarvis, hitting the waves every single morning at 5 a.m. Not for an hour or two, but for 5 punishing hours daily before filming would even begin. His body was covered in bruises, his muscles screamed, his skin burned raw from salt water and Sunday. It was like learning a new language at gunpoint, Reeves later said. The training wasn't just physical torture, it was psychological warfare. Jarvis intentionally put Keanu into increasingly dangerous situations, believing that real fear would translate on screen. By filming, Keanu could genuinely surf, not expertly but authentically enough that roughly 30% of his surfing scenes are actually him, a remarkable achievement for someone who started from zero. 3. Patrick Swayze performed 90% of his own stunts, including real skydiving, despite being explicitly forbidden by the studio. The studio's insurance policy was crystal clear. Absolutely no actors were permitted to skydive. The risk was deemed unacceptable. Swayze didn't just ignore this rule, he shattered it spectacularly. With over 50 jumps already in his logbook, Swayze refused to let a stuntman take his place. During production, he secretly performed an additional 55 jumps. These weren't simple, straight drops. These were complex free falls requiring split-second timing and precision. When studio executives discovered what was happening, they erupted in fury. Legal teams drafted termination notices. Insurance adjusters threatened to pull coverage from the entire production. Bigelow found herself in an impossible position, stuck between her fearless star and the studio writing the checks. The solution? A carefully crafted deception. Official paperwork showed stuntmen performing the jumps, while Swayze quietly continued leaping from planes. The proof is on screen. Those aren't stunt doubles in most shots. That's actually Swayze, falling through the clouds at terminal velocity, grinning with the pure joy of someone truly becoming their character. 4. The iconic foot chase scene through Los Angeles backyards was shot without permits, using real homes and surprised residents. The heart-pounding chase, where Johnny Utah pursues Bodhi through Venice Beach neighborhoods, wasn't supposed to be filmed that way. The production had budgeted for constructed sets and controlled environments. But when Catherine Bigelow scouted locations, she was struck by the authentic, maze-like quality of the real Venice neighborhoods. It wasn't a careful plan, it was beautiful chaos. With a skeleton crew and handheld cameras, they simply started filming, charging through actual yards while residents were home. The production assistants would knock on doors seconds before cameras rolled, offering quick cash payments for permission to storm through private property. Many homeowners appear as genuine background characters, their shocked expressions completely authentic as Reeves and stunt performers vaulted their fences and trampled their gardens. The dog that famously chases Utah wasn't trained, it was a resident's pet that genuinely wanted to bite Keanu Reeves. The fear on his face is real. The exhaustion is real. The sweat-soaked panic is real. This guerrilla filmmaking approach saved money but created something priceless, unmatched authenticity that no staged sequence could capture. In 5, the famous "I am an FBI agent" scene took 90 takes to complete, and for a surprising reason. The moment when a frustrated Johnny Utah flashes his badge and screams, "I am an FBI agent," has become one of cinema's most quoted lines. On paper, it seemed straightforward. In reality, it became production quicksand that consumed an entire day of shooting. It wasn't because Keanu couldn't remember the line. It wasn't technical difficulties. It was laughter. Uncontrollable, contagious, production-halting laughter. Every time Reeves attempted the intense declaration, actor John C. McGinley, playing his FBI supervisor, would break into hysterics. This triggered Keanu, who, despite his best efforts, couldn't maintain his serious demeanor. Take after take was ruined by smirks, giggles, and eventually full-blown laughter that infected the entire crew. Bigelow, normally patient, became increasingly frustrated as the day wore on, and the simple scene burned through precious budget dollars. By take 60, she was threatening to cut the scene entirely. By take 75, production assistants were placed just off camera with severe expressions, trying to intimidate the actors into seriousness. Finally, on take 90, exhaustion overcame humor, and Reeves delivered the line with the perfect mix of frustration and authority, perhaps channeling his genuine annoyance at needing 90 attempts to complete a 10-second scene. 6. 4 different endings were filmed, including one where Bodhi survives and escapes to another country. The film's powerful ending showing Bodhi's final wave wasn't always the conclusion audiences would experience. Studio executives, nervous about test screenings, demanded multiple versions. The original script had a more ambiguous ending. Bodhi catches his wave, but we never see if he survives. Another version showed Utah arresting Bodhi, leading to a conventional justice-served conclusion. The most controversial alternate ending had Bodhi surviving completely. He escapes to Indonesia, where years later, Utah tracks him down. Instead of arresting him, they share a meaningful conversation about freedom and responsibility before Utah walks away, allowing his friend to remain free. These weren't just minor tweaks. Each version required extensive filming in different locations with full crew setups. Thousands of production dollars poured into scenes that would never see daylight. Bigelow fought bitterly for her preferred ending, the one we know today, arguing that any other conclusion would betray the film's philosophical core. The battle became so heated that at one point, Bigelow threatened to remove her name from the film entirely if the studio imposed a conventional ending. Her ultimate victory wasn't just artistic, it was a rare moment when a female director successfully stood her ground against studio pressure in early 1990 seconds Hollywood. 7. The ex-presidents weren't pure fiction, they were based on actual bank robbers who were still at large during filming. The film's masked robbers weren't a screenwriter's clever invention, they were ripped directly from FBI case files. Between 1987 and 1990, a group dubbed the Ex-President's Gang robbed 6 banks in Southern California wearing Reagan, Carter, Nixon, and Johnson masks. When filming began in 1991, these criminals hadn't been caught. It wasn't just a passing similarity. The real robbers operated with military precision, finishing each robbery in under 2 minutes. They never fired their weapons. They struck at specific times of day, all elements faithfully recreated in the film. The FBI wasn't amused by Hollywood glamorizing active criminals. They initially refused to cooperate with the production. When the script included specific details about bank security systems and FBI procedures, federal agents showed up on set, demanding script changes. The film's release created an unexpected problem: copycat robberies. In the months following Point Break's debut, 27 bank robberies occurred across America, featuring perpetrators in presidential masks. None were successful, turns out real. Bank robbing is harder than it looks on screen. The actual ex-president's gang? They were caught in 1994, when one member, eerily similar to the film's plot, couldn't resist bragging about their exploits to a girlfriend who contacted authorities. 8. Gary Busey performed his entire role with a freshly broken clavicle and refused pain medication to channel the agony into his performance. 2 days before filming his first scene, Gary Busey crashed his motorcycle on Mulholland Drive. The accident shattered his clavicle, requiring emergency surgery. Most actors would delay shooting, most productions would recast. Busey wasn't most actors. Against medical advice and to the horror of the production's insurance team, Busey arrived on set with his arm in a sling and surgical staples still visible. Director Bigelow offered to rewrite his scenes to accommodate the injury. Busey refused. The script called for an intense physical performance, including fight scenes and gun battles. Somehow, he would deliver. It wasn't just stubbornness, it was method acting taken to extremes. Busey declined all pain medication, believing the genuine agony would enhance his performance as the veteran FBI agent. During filming, crew members reported hearing the distinct sound of bone fragments grinding together when Busey moved too quickly. In the beach football scene, when Pappas tackles a fleeing suspect, Busey's scream isn't acting, it's the authentic sound of a man with a broken shoulder slamming into hard-packed sand. The production doctor attempted to pull him from the set 5 separate times. Each time, Busey signed liability waivers and continued working. The physical toll was evident, but Busey's intensity created an indelible character that transcended the typical partner-cop trope. 9. The production nearly ended when 3 camera operators almost drowned filming the 50-year storm sequence. The climactic wave sequence at Bells Beach wasn't just challenging, it was nearly fatal. Bigelow insisted on authenticity, placing camera operators directly in the impact zone of 20-plus-foot waves. These weren't normal filming conditions. These were monster swells that professional surfers approach with caution. It wasn't recklessness, it was calculated risk that miscalculated nature's power. 3 specially designed waterproof cameras were constructed, each costing over $80,000. The operators wore military-grade wetsuits and oxygen systems designed to provide 45 seconds of emergency air if pulled underwater. On the second day of shooting this sequence, disaster struck. A rogue wave significantly larger than predicted crashed directly onto the primary camera position. The safety tethers designed to prevent operators from being swept away snapped like thread. 3 crew members disappeared beneath churning white water. Production halted, rescue boats deployed. For 7 terrifying minutes, there was no sign of the missing men. When they finally surfaced, all 3 required medical attention for near drowning, hypothermia, and in one case, a dislocated shoulder. Equipment worth over $200,000 was lost to the ocean. The insurance company demanded the sequence be completed with special effects. Bigelow refused, arguing nothing could match the raw power of actual waves. After a 1-week safety review, filming resumed but with revised protocols including jet ski rescue teams stationed every 50 yards and improved breathing apparatus. 10. The film's budget spiraled out of control so severely that Keanu Reeves took a 25% pay cut to prevent the production from being shut down. Go ahead and like and subscribe because we're about to reveal how Keanu Reeves saved Point Break from disaster with a selfless act that Hollywood executives still talk about today. By the halfway mark, Point Break was drowning not in ocean water but red ink. The original $14 million budget had ballooned to nearly $24 million. The skydiving sequences alone had consumed 3 times their allocated funds. Multiple cameras destroyed by saltwater needed replacement. Weather delays stretched the schedule by 23 days. 20th Century Fox executives arrived on set with an ultimatum: either cut 3 major action sequences or shut down production entirely. These weren't minor scenes. They included the night surfing sequence and the iconic airplane jump, moments that would define the film. It wasn't a negotiation, it was execution day for Bigelow's vision. When Keanu Reeves learned of the crisis, he did something virtually unheard of in Hollywood. Without publicizing the decision, he approached the producers and offered to defer 25% of his $1.5 million salary. Nor was it just a gesture. Reeves also gave up his trailer, began sharing transportation with crew members, and personally called Fox executives to vouch for Bigelow's vision. His actions created a ripple effect. Patrick Swayze followed suit with a smaller but significant deferment, and several department heads reduced their fees. The combined savings allowed the production to complete filming without compromising the action sequences that would make the film legendary. Reeves never publicly discussed this sacrifice, and the full amount of his deferred payment remains unknown to this day. 11. Lori Petty was almost recast halfway through filming due to creative conflicts with Patrick Swayze that became physical on set. The palpable tension between Tyler and Bodhi on screen wasn't all acting. Behind the cameras, Lori Petty and Patrick Swayze were engaged in a cold war that occasionally erupted into heated confrontations. The conflict stemmed from fundamentally different approaches to character preparation. Petty, trained in theater, preferred detailed backstory discussions and extensive rehearsals. Swayze, more intuitive, believed over-preparation killed spontaneity and refused to rehearse beyond basic blocking. What began as philosophical disagreement escalated into practical problems when scenes required intimate contact or complex emotional exchanges. The breaking point came during filming of the beach house confrontation scene. After multiple takes where Petty felt Swayze was deliberately changing his performance to throw her off, she allegedly shoved him forcefully when cameras stopped rolling. Crew members had to physically separate them as the argument intensified. That night, producers called an emergency meeting. Recasting options were seriously discussed, with names including Holly, Hunter, and Jodie Foster mentioned as potential replacements. Ultimately, Bigelow intervened, not by forcing reconciliation, but by strategically rescheduling the production calendar to minimize Petty and Swayze's scenes together. Ironically, Their genuine conflict enhanced the film's underlying tension, Tyler sensing something dangerous beneath Bodhi's charismatic surface. Years later, both actors acknowledged their friction had unintentionally served the story, though they maintained a professional distance that continues to this day. 12. The film used genuine bank employees rather than extras during robbery scenes to capture authentic fear reactions. When planning the bank robbery sequences, Bigelow faced a challenge. Actors playing terrified hostages often overact, creating melodrama instead of realism. Her solution wasn't more rehearsal. It was calculated ambush of real bank workers. It wasn't deception, it was controlled reality. The production recruited actual bank tellers and managers from Los Angeles financial institutions, telling them they would be background extras in a bank scene. What they weren't told, the exact nature of the scene, or when the masked robbers would burst through the doors. The first robbery sequence used 3 cameras rolling simultaneously to capture the genuine shock when armed men in presidential masks stormed in screaming commands. The startled expressions, the trembling hands, the instinctive, protective postures, all authentic human responses impossible to rehearse. Several bank employees were so genuinely terrified they needed medical attention afterward for elevated blood pressure and anxiety attacks. One woman, a 15-year veteran of Bank of America who had experienced an actual robbery years earlier, suffered a panic attack that temporarily halted production. Psychologists later criticized this approach as potentially traumatic for participants. Bigelow defended the technique, arguing that informed consent had been obtained and that the resulting footage captured a truth about human fear that conventional filming could never achieve. The proof may be in the final product. The robbery scenes maintain their power to disturb viewers precisely because the fear displayed isn't performed, it's experienced. 13. Kathryn Bigelow was the studio's 7th choice to direct, after 6 male directors rejected the project as too conceptually absurd. Point Break's premise, FBI agent infiltrates surfing bank robbers, reads almost like parody. Today, we recognize Bigelow's genius in elevating this concept into something transcendent. In 1989, studio executives saw only risk. It wasn't their first choice. It wasn't even their 6th. The script was initially offered to established action directors, including John McTiernan, Rennie Harlin, and John Badham. All passed, with McTiernan reportedly calling it conceptually interesting but practically ridiculous. Richard Donner went further, suggesting the script needed complete overhaul to eliminate the philosophizing surfer nonsense. Bigelow, despite directing the cult hit Near Dark, wasn't considered until producer James Cameron forcefully advocated for her. Even then, the studio offered her the job with troubling conditions, a reduced budget, limited creative control, and mandatory approval of all action sequences by a studio-appointed supervisor. It wasn't just skepticism, it was systemic doubt of a female director's ability to handle masculine action filmmaking. Bigelow not only accepted these handicaps but turned them into advantages. Working with less money forced innovative solutions. The constraints demanded creativity, and the necessity to prove herself drove a perfectionism that elevated every frame. The film's subsequent influence on action cinema speaks volumes. The studio's 7th choice delivered what 6 established male directors couldn't envision: a perfect synthesis of philosophical depth and adrenaline-fueled spectacle that continues influencing filmmakers 3 decades later. 14. The famous meatball sandwich that Gary Busey's character obsesses over was actually a prop made of wax and paint that made him violently ill. Gary Busey's memorable line about not getting his meatball sandwich resonated with audiences as an authentic character moment. The irony? The sandwich itself was completely inedible, a prop creation of wax, clay, and paint, designed to maintain perfect appearance under hot lights. It wasn't supposed to be consumed, it was purely visual. But Busey, famous for his improvisational approach, decided during filming that actually biting the sandwich would make the moment more convincing. Before the prop master could intervene, Busey had taken a substantial bite of the toxic creation. The cameras kept rolling as Busey, committed to the scene, swallowed the inedible materials rather than break character. The take was so compelling that Bigelow immediately declared it perfect. Only afterward did Busey reveal what he had done. The consequences weren't minor. Within hours, Busey developed severe stomach pains requiring medical intervention. Production shut down for a half day while he received treatment for ingesting petroleum-based wax and industrial paint compounds. When he returned to set, the medical team insisted he carry activated charcoal tablets for the remainder of filming. In the finished film, the passion with which Pappas discusses his sandwich gains unintentional authenticity. Busey's performance literally involved suffering for his art. Years later, when fans would send him real meatball sandwiches at conventions, a common occurrence, Busey would graciously accept them but admit he hadn't been able to eat one since Point Break without experiencing nausea. 15. The production actually infiltrated a real skydiving group for 6 months before filming began to capture authentic skydiving culture. The skydiving sequences aren't just technically impressive, they're culturally authentic. This wasn't achieved through research books or consultants. It required deep immersion in a subculture known for its wariness of outsiders. It wasn't casual observation, it was calculated infiltration. 6 months before principal photography, Bigelow dispatched a team including a cinematographer, sound recordist, and 2 production assistants to join a prominent Southern California skydiving group. Their cover story: they were gathering material for a documentary about extreme sports. For over 20 weekends, this team lived among the skydivers, gradually earning trust and capturing hundreds of hours of raw footage and audio. They documented the distinct language patterns, ritualistic behaviors, and philosophical outlooks that defined this community of adrenaline seekers. The infiltration team recorded conversations without participants knowing the material would inform a Hollywood film. They photographed the interior decorations of skydivers' homes to replicate in set designs. They even documented intimate personal relationships that directly influenced how Bodie's group dynamics were portrayed. When the actual film crew arrived months later, real skydivers were recruited as extras and consultants. Many recognized the production team's deep knowledge of their culture and were shocked to learn they'd been studied for half a year. This background work explains why Point Break's portrayal of skydiving culture feels so authentic. The film didn't imagine this world. It documented it and then recreated it with reverent accuracy. 16. Keanu Reeves nearly died during the night surfing scene when he was knocked unconscious underwater and rescued by a safety diver who wasn't supposed to be there. The night surfing sequence where Utah joins Bodie's crew in riding waves by moonlight looks magical on screen. Behind the scenes, it nearly cost Keanu Reeves his life. The scene was filmed at Leo Carrillo State Beach with minimal lighting to maintain the authentic darkness essential to the sequence's mood. It wasn't just challenging, it was legitimately dangerous. Surfing at night is perilous. Even for experts, depth perception disappears, obstacles become invisible, and orientation becomes nearly impossible if you wipe out. Despite these risks, Reeves insisted on performing as much of the sequence himself as possible. During one take, Reeves misjudged a wave and was pulled over the fall's surfing terminology for being dragged over the breaking lip of a wave and slammed downward. His head struck either his board or the sandy bottom with sufficient force to render him unconscious. In the darkness, with Reeves wearing a black wetsuit in black water, the designated safety team lost visual contact. What saved his life wasn't the official protocol. It was a fortunate breach of rules. A junior safety diver, explicitly instructed to remain on standby at the shore, had disobeyed orders and positioned himself closer to the filming area. This unauthorized diver spotted Reeves floating face down and reached him nearly 40 seconds before the official rescue team even realized something was wrong. Reeves regained consciousness on the beach, insisted on continuing filming after a medical check, and never publicly discussed how close the incident came to tragedy. The junior diver who saved him was initially reprimanded for leaving his position before production executives reversed course and awarded him a bonus. 17. The Reagan mask used in the film was rejected by the White House as disrespectful to the presidency, despite the production seeking official approval. The presidential masks are among the film's most iconic visual elements. Creating them wasn't just an artistic decision, it involved political sensitivities and unexpected government intervention. The production initially approached the Reagan Presidential Library, requesting permission to create a mask based on official photographs. It wasn't just courtesy, it was legal prudence. The rights to presidential images exist in a complex legal gray area, particularly for living former presidents. The formal request detailed how the masks would be used, emphasizing the fictional nature of the story and the fact that the criminals would ultimately face justice. The response was swift and negative. Reagan's office declined permission, stating that depicting the former president's likeness being used in violent criminal activity would disrespect the dignity of the presidential office. Similar responses came from representatives for Carter and Nixon. The Johnson Library, interestingly, never responded. Faced with this rejection, the production pivoted to creating masks that captured the essence of each president without exact photographic replication, just different enough to avoid legal challenges while remaining instantly recognizable to audiences. The masks were designed with subtle distortions. Reagan's jaw slightly elongated, Nixon's nose marginally enlarged, Carter's ears slightly adjusted. The legal department still insisted on a disclaimer in the credits, explicitly stating that the former presidents had not endorsed or approved their portrayals. Years later, a Reagan Library representative admitted they regretted the decision, as the masks became such a culturally significant image that the library eventually created an exhibit about the film's impact on presidential portrayal in popular culture. 18. The famous jump out of a plane with no parachute scene took 17 takes because Patrick Swayze insisted on doing the entire stunt himself. The sequence where Bodhi forces Utah to skydive without preparation is among cinema's most memorable acts of psychological dominance. Creating it pushed boundaries of both filmmaking and safety protocols. The scene required Reeves to fall from a plane, with Swayze jumping after him to eventually pull their shared parachute. It wasn't simulated. It was actual free fall. While most productions would film actors against green screens and add falling backgrounds later, Bigelow demanded authenticity. This meant actual jumps from 12,500 feet. Insurance rules mandated experienced skydivers perform the most dangerous elements. Swayze, with his skydiving experience, saw an opportunity to bypass this restriction. He convinced Bigelow that his actual skydiving skills made him uniquely qualified to perform the full sequence, including the critical moment of catching another person in midair, one of skydiving's most dangerous maneuvers. Over 3 days, Swayze performed 17 separate jumps with a stunt double standing in for Reeves during the actual falls. Each jump required perfect weather conditions, precise aircraft positioning, and split-second timing. On the 4th attempt, a mid-air collision nearly occurred when wind conditions changed unexpectedly. The most dangerous element, Bodhi catching Utah in mid-air, was attempted only after 14 successful practice jumps. Even then, the stunt coordinator insisted on additional safety measures, including a secondary parachute technician jumping simultaneously just outside camera range. The effort paid off with heart-stopping authenticity. When Bodhi pulls the ripcord after catching Utah, the genuine physical strain on Swayze's face isn't acting, it's the real consequence of fighting aerodynamic forces while responsible for two falling bodies instead of one. 19. The film's iconic, ankle-breaking foot chase was performed by Keanu Reeves with a legitimate ankle injury that doctors warned could cause permanent damage. Early in filming, Keanu Reeves sprained his ankle during a surfing training session. Medical professionals recommended 2 weeks of rest time the tight schedule couldn't accommodate. Instead of delaying production, the injury was incorporated into the script, creating one of cinema's most memorable chase sequences. It wasn't adaptation, it was exploitation of genuine pain. The famous scene where Utah chases Bodhi but is stopped by his injured ankle wasn't originally planned. Bigelow, seeing Reeves limping between takes, recognized an opportunity for raw authenticity. The chase sequence was hastily rewritten and bumped up in the shooting schedule. The production medical advisor strongly objected, warning that running on the injury could cause permanent ligament damage. Legal teams prepared liability waivers. Insurance representatives threatened to void coverage. Despite these warnings, Reeves committed to performing the sequence without a double. The pain visible on his face when Utah collapses and fires his gun in frustration isn't acting, it's the genuine agony of running at full speed on a damaged joint. The subsequent scene where he screams in rage was filmed immediately after, with Reeves channeling his actual physical suffering into his performance. The medical gamble had lasting consequences. Reeves completed the film with an ankle brace hidden under his wardrobe, and even 20 years later, he has acknowledged occasional pain in that ankle during weather changes. When asked if he regrets the decision, Reeves has consistently maintained that the scene's power justified the long-term physical cost, a testament to his commitment to authenticity over personal comfort. 20. The famous firing gun into the air scene caused a genuine police response that temporarily shut down production. The cathartic moment where Johnny Utah fires his gun into the air rather than shooting Bodhi became one of cinema's most referenced scenes, even parodied in films like Hot Fuzz. Creating this powerful moment generated an unintended real-world crisis that nearly ended production. It wasn't carelessness, it was miscommunication. The scene was filmed on location at Leo Carrillo State Beach after midnight. Production had obtained permits and notified local authorities about filming involving prop weapons. However, a shift change at the police department meant incoming officers weren't properly briefed. When Reeves fired the blank-loaded weapon repeatedly into the air using a special prop gun designed for maximum muzzle flash for the night filming, nearby residents called 911 reporting gunfire. Within minutes, 13 police vehicles descended on the beach with weapons drawn. The resulting confrontation was chaotic. Officers, believing they were responding to an active shooter, ordered the entire crew to lie face down on the sand. Equipment was damaged as police secured the area. Bigelow was temporarily handcuffed when she attempted to explain the situation while reaching for the permit documentation in her pocket. It took over 2 hours to resolve the misunderstanding, during which time the perfect filming conditions, specific tide, and moonlight required for the scene were lost. The production was fined $25,000 for the incident, and additional restrictions were placed on the remaining beach filming days. When filming resumed the following night, the scene had to be completed in just 2 takes due to permit limitations. The pressure of these constraints actually enhanced the emotional intensity, as Reeves knew he had minimal opportunity to capture the critical moment. The raw emotion visible in the final cut, A perfect blend of frustration, moral conflict, and surrender was partially fueled by the production's genuine struggle to complete filming under increased scrutiny. Bonus fact: what audiences couldn't have known when Point Break released was its darkest legacy, how its fictional narrative would tragically cross into reality. Between 1992 and 1994, four individuals later identified as former college students conducted 7 bank robberies across the southeastern United States. It wasn't just inspiration, it was fanatical emulation. The group used the same 4-person configuration, employed presidential masks identical to those in the film, and even quoted dialogue from the movie during the robberies. Like their fictional counterparts, they never harmed hostages and operated with military precision. Law enforcement initially treated these as copycat crimes, unfortunate but expected after a high-profile film about charismatic criminals. The situation turned darker when investigators discovered the group had formed a quasi-spiritual surfing commune in coastal North Carolina, directly modeling their lifestyle on Bodie's philosophy of seeking the ultimate rush. The criminal spree ended tragically in March 1994 when police surrounded their beach house following a failed robbery attempt. After a 5-hour standoff, 3 members of the group committed suicide rather than surrender. The 4th was critically wounded attempting the same but survived to face prosecution. During the subsequent trial, evidence emerged that the group leader had viewed the film over 120 times, had covered his walls with handwritten manifestos about spiritual freedom through adrenaline, and considered Patrick Swayze's character a legitimate philosophical guide. Psychiatric experts testified about the rare phenomenon of narrative-induced psychosis, where vulnerable individuals become unable to distinguish between fictional narrative and reality. This tragedy prompted Hollywood to engage in serious discussions about the potential real-world impact of glamorizing criminal behavior, even in fictional contexts. For years afterward, Point Break remained part of FBI training materials, not for its accurate portrayal of procedure, but as a case study in how fiction can sometimes inspire genuine criminal activity. Point Break wasn't just a surf movie with bank robbers. It wasn't just an action film with philosophical pretensions. 3 decades later, it stands revealed as a cultural touchstone that redefined action cinema while exposing the thin line between on-screen fiction and real-world consequences. The film that studios initially dismissed as conceptually absurd has influenced everything from the Fast and the Furious franchise to Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Its visual language, saturated colors, immersive action sequences, and existential beach conversations has become part of cinema's essential vocabulary. Behind the adrenaline and ocean spray was something more profound, a production where actors and filmmakers risked everything physically, financially, and professionally to create something authentic. They didn't just make a movie about extreme risk-takers, they became them. If you've enjoyed these revelations about Point Break, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which movies behind-the-scenes secrets you want us to explore next. Because just like Bodhi taught us, the only limit is how far you're willing to go.